On the right, Arnaud de Bourgras. In the crossfire, LaRouche, candidate for the U.S. Senate, Webster Tarpley. And in Chicago, Democratic nominee for governor of Illinois, Adlai Stevenson III.
This is definitely the hottest issue in the world today. And given the fact that I'm a hellraiser and a troublemaker, I intend to cause a lot more trouble for the enemies of this country. I want you all to be very clear that this election victory is a shot that's been heard around the world.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. Now, who was that lady? She is a LaRouche. You may have met them. They sit at airports, neatly dressed and recently bathed. They buttonhole you. They tell you that the Queen of England is behind the drug traffic, that Henry Kissinger is a homosexual, not only a Jew, but a faggot, is the way they put it. Worse, they want to talk to you about it. And the best way to deal with them is to keep walking and pay no attention. But I speak specifically of the airport and not in general, because that's what the Illinois voters did. They paid no attention at all. As a result, the lady you just heard and one of her fellow LaRouches were nominated on the Democratic ticket in Illinois, and they've just about destroyed that ticket. Later, we'll talk about that with Adlai Stevenson. Now they're running 149 candidates for Congress across the country, and here is one of them, Webster Tarpley, candidate for the Democratic nomination for Senate in New York, and a LaRouche for 17 years. Pay attention. Arno?
In 1974, an FBI report described the LaRouche organization, then known as the National Caucus of Labor Committees, as a violence-oriented organization which has described itself as an organization of revolutionary socialists. And then it goes on. What I'd like to know from you is how you went from being socialist revolutionaries to neo-Nazis camouflaged as Democrats.
I think you should stop insulting the intelligence of the American voter, and especially the voters of Illinois. We've just had a very important election in that state. I think it's a kind of referendum on the Graham-Rudman law. It's a referendum on AIDS. It's a referendum on the situation vis-a-vis the Soviets. It comes at a time of tremendous crisis, and I would hope that you would not banalize the debate this evening by getting into these gratuitous
I'm asking you a
slanders.
question. You were socialist revolutionaries at one point. The evidence is irrefutable.
I think that your problem, you have an argument with the voters from the state of Illinois. I think people like you...
Because you've deceived them.
People like you believe that elections are okay as long as agents of the bankers are elected, but if puppets of the bankers are not elected, then you don't seem to like the idea of free elections.
All right, well, let me ask you about today's events. The British Zionist organism must be destroyed. That's Lyndon LaRouche. Do you believe that?
I don't think we came here to talk about the interpretation of texts. I think we should talk about issues. And let us see what the voters of the state of Illinois...
terrorism is an issue in the world, and Lyndon B. LaRouche says that the Israeli intelligence service is behind all terrorism. Do you believe that?
That's, first of all, not what he says. There is a certain sense in which you can say that a figure like General Ariel Sharon of Israel is up to his neck in international terrorism. And I think Count de Borchgrave, with your...
not a count. I don't know why you would insult me by calling me a count.
Well, I think you're a representative of the Belgian royal family, actually.
I am not. I have no connection with the Belgian royal family. More disinformation from the LaRouche organization.
You should know that General Sharon has a couple of people in the Abu Nidal Central Committee. And
you've just taken leave of your critical faculties in front of your viewers.
All right, let me ask you this. Do you believe, as Lyndon LaRouche does, that there ought to be, or said he did, that there ought to be a special prosecutor's office to try Jews for treason?
I think that you're making up more slanders.
No, I'm
you're
not
making up
it up.
More inventions. You're talking about more text. You're doing anything you can to avoid discussing what the voters of the state of Illinois have done by upsetting the apple cart of the arrogance of power, people who think that because they control the banks, they control the Congress, they control the TV networks, that they can decide who gets elected.
You said the Illinois election was a referendum on age. Is the LaRouche party got a means of dealing with this? Do they want to? Can they eliminate age?
I think it was a referendum on AIDS in the sense that the United States government at the federal level and at all state levels is doing absolutely nothing to stop the most dangerous epidemic in the history of the human race, something that is worse than thermonuclear war itself. and people want to see something done about it.
What would you do about it?
I think that, first of all, we ought to have, clearly, a kind of Apollo crash program to find a cure and a prevention for AIDS.
Well, we've got that. Go on. Now,
we
what
don't
else
have
do
it.
we do?
We're spending $220 million a year, which is a bad joke, and the Graham-Rudman law is going to cut that down even lower because Donald T. Regan in the White House doesn't think that we ought to
What do
spend money on
What
it.
do the bankers have to do with AIDS?
The bankers have two things to do with it. First of all, if you look at the origin of AIDS, it comes out of Central Africa, where the International Monetary Fund, and that, of course, is the bankers and their international organization, has driven these countries down into poverty so far that a new, highly virulent and highly dangerous disease has emerged. The second connection is Don Regan in the White House, who is basically telling the president, we can't spend any money on a serious program to combat AIDS because it will interfere with the
Mr. Tarpley, you're busy, it seems, muddying the democratic political process in this country. You are the editor, are you not?
You seem to have a quarrel with the voters of the state of Illinois.
No, I don't. I'm talking about you and people like you. Are you not the editor of Executive Intelligence Review?
I'm actually just a contributing editor of Executive Intelligence Review.
Executive Intelligence Review, which is a LaRouche publication, a glossy one that sells for a fancy price of $300 or $400 a year, has specialized in targeting people who have been effective in exposing KGB and KGB proxy disinformation operations as KGB agents themselves. I'm talking about yours truly, Michael Ledeen, Robert Moss, and many others. That is rather strange, is it not? Why would you target people who have been effective in exposing these operations? Why would you call me a KGB agent in your publication, which you did?
You know that Lyndon LaRouche right now is the man who is most slandered in the Soviet press.
No, you slandered me, and I want your answer to it.
In Izvestia, in Literaturnia Gazeta, and the Soviets hate Mr. LaRouche because they rightly
How many times have you been to Eastern Europe yourself?
Quite a number of times.
Yes. You have very good contacts in East Germany, very good contacts in Poland, do you not?
Not very good contacts at all. As a matter of fact, I couldn't go there these days.
And you met with Mr. Jaruzelski in Poland, correct?
No. I met with Cardinal Glemp.
Yes.
Now, wait a minute, I want to ask you about the Nazi Holocaust, because Mr. LaRouche is on record on that. Do you agree with him that this is a contrivance, the Holocaust, a contrivance of the Zionists?
The Holocaust is a historical fact, which of course existed. And you're talking not only about 6 million Jews, you're talking about tens of millions of other people, including Slavs, Russians, Gypsies.
So you are of independent mind. You don't agree with Mr. LaRouche on this?
I think this is exactly what Mr. LaRouche has had to say.
No, he said the Nazi Holocaust is one of the hoaxes perpetrated by the Zionists.
Well, that doesn't make any sense, does it? So I don't think Mr. LaRouche ever said it. I wonder where you get these quotes.
What about B'nai B'rith?
Now, if you're saying the origin of these slanders is the Anti-Defamation League, I think I ought to explain to people what this is. The so-called Anti-Defamation League is a group of kind of ideologues or apologists or spokesmen, I guess you'd say, for the Meyer-Lansky family of organized crime and the international drug mafia.
The ADL is?
That's right.
I hadn't heard that.
The former head of the ADL, who is still a national officer of it, Kenneth Pialkin, is none other than the lawyer for Robert Vesco, who is the notorious, infamous organized crime boss, head of the international
spouting the Anti-Defamation League
in Cuba at the right hand of Fidel Castro.
Spouting twaddle in all its un-Russian
Where did you go to school?
Mr. Bialkin.
Tell me where you went to school.
I went to Princeton.
You went to Princeton.
That's right.
And when did you graduate?
1966.
In what?
In languages.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it true that LaRouche, your boss, was a conscientious objector in World War II, right up until Hitler invaded the Soviet Union?
You can look at all of this in Mr. LaRouche's autobiography called The Power of Reason, and you can see that because of this Quaker family, that's the case.
Power of unreason. When Hitler invaded Russia, he suddenly changed his mind and became a medic? Is that correct?
Yeah. I think, though, we're getting away once again from the things that your audience wants to hear
ran
about.
for the president of the United States.
You have a big quarrel, again, not just with me, but with the voters of the state of Illinois, who don't seem to have given any importance.
The audience wants to hear about AIDS.
They ought to hear about who you are.
How are you going to eliminate AIDS? You never told me.
Once again, we've got to go beyond this ridiculous 220 million, which is shrinking. You've got to write a blank check for biomedical science. You've got to say, we are going to spend as much on AIDS as it takes to defeat this dread disease, because our lives depend on it.
All right, now go on.
However, in the meantime, it's of course the case that we cannot turn our backs on the standard, tried and true methods of public health, which are screening, that is a blood test, the best kind we can get, and quarantining, which simply means that people who have AIDS must be hospitalized. And children who have AIDS, most emphatically, should not go to school. They should be hospitalized and given the best care that money can buy.
All right, and would you carry that through to people whose blood shows that they're carrying the virus?
I think we ought to develop the flow cytometer. This takes a little money. Donald T. Reagan and David Rockefeller might not like it, but we could be able to have a test for the virus.
Wait a minute, why would David Rockefeller not like it?
Again, because David Rockefeller and the rest of the Graham-Rudman clique think that the #1 task is not the survival of the United States, it's not saving the lives of our citizens, but it's this insanity of Graham-Rudman and the deficit.
They're all traitors, right? Henry Kissinger's a traitor, David Rockefeller's a traitor, I'm a traitor since I'm a KGB agent, according to you.
I run my campaign in New York State based on the United States Constitution, which gives us a very specific definition of this. Treason against the United States shall consist in levying war against them and aiding their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. And I think that most of the people on the list that you mentioned do qualify for that, with overt acts.
The FBI describes your organization as violence-prone, violence-oriented. You've intimidated journalists. You had 300 demonstrators in front of my newspaper. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Times. This morning you had your troopers in front of NBC.
You deserve the count.
In front of NBC, I am not a count, in front of NBC, you had signs this morning saying NBC killed Olof Palme of Sweden. What the hell does that mean?
I don't think that the judgment of the FBI can be relied upon. We were told by the FBI that there was no threat of terrorism
what does that mean?
Inside the United States. We were told by Judge Webster of the FBI that there is no such thing as narco-terrorism. I've just come back from a fact-finding trip to Guatemala, and I can tell you that there is narco-terrorism, and it seems to be among the Contras,
not my
the
question.
people that you
yes, the Contras. I know you're against them. Yes, I know. That's
this
another
faction of the international
Soviet
drug mafia.
disinformation team.
Well, if you think that the United States ought to intervene in Central America on the side of one of two factions of dope
No, against totalitarianism, but your organization is totalitarian. One day on the left, one day on the far right.
Who's totalitarian here?
All right,
I'm arguing in favor of the result of a democratic election, and that we ought to see what were the issues that caused
You mean a
citizens to
perversion of
care.
democracy?
Look, one more question.
Again, you have a quarrel with the citizens of the state of Illinois, and I think with the American
No,
people
the
as a
citizens
whole.
of Illinois don't know who you are.
Mondale and Kissinger are agents of influence for the Soviet Union. Is that right?
Absolutely correct.
How so?
Well, then he has really taken leave of his critical
In the case
faculties,
of
poor
Henry
man.
Kissinger, as many listeners know, his father was already an agent of the Tsarist regime of Russia, and Kissinger renewed his contacts to Soviet intelligence through blackmail about his
His father was
homosexuality.
the superintendent of schools in a little German town.
He was a figure of the Bavarian Socialist Republic of Kurt Eisner in the early 1920s as an NKVD agent at that time. So Kissinger is constitutionally a Soviet agent and a British agent, which I think perhaps
You
might
just
get
totally,
one of you
you
two
just totally
gentlemen.
discredit your movement in front of millions of people. You
I
might
think
be
it's quite the
your
opposite.
voters.
I am
Do
talking
you-
to the public and not
Well,
to
the public,
the
do you-
climate of
do
opinion
Do
you're
you
trying to create.
expect to win the Democratic nomination in New York?
I absolutely expect to win the Democratic nomination of the state of New York, and I'm not just running as an individual. As was pointed to at the beginning, we've got 15 candidates for the Senate. We've got 8 candidates for state
All right,
houses,
and the Queen of
and
England is a
150
terrorist.
All right.
candidates for the House of Representatives.
Count de Borgrave, we are out of time.
Yes,
and
Baron.
We are. Next, we will hear from Adlai Stevenson in Illinois. We'll be right back. Is to keep walking and pay no attention. But I speak specifically of the airport and not in general, because that's what the Illinois voters did. They paid no attention at all. As a result, the lady you just heard and one of her fellow LaRouches were nominated on the Democratic ticket in Illinois, and they've just about destroyed that ticket. Later, we'll talk about that with Adlai Stevenson. Now they're running 149 candidates for Congress across the country, and here is one of them. On the right, Arnaud de Borgrave. In the crossfire, LaRouche, candidate for the U.S. Senate, Webster Tarpley. And in Chicago, Democratic nominee for governor of Illinois, Adlai Stevenson III.
This is definitely the hottest issue in the world today. And given the fact that I'm a hellraiser and a troublemaker, I intend to cause a lot more trouble for the enemies of this country. I want you all to be very clear that this election victory...
Webster Tarpley, candidate for the Democratic nomination for Senate in New York, and a LaRouche for 17 years. Pay attention. Arno?
In 1974, an FBI report described the LaRouche organization, then known as the National Caucus of Labor Committees, as a violence-oriented organization which has described itself as an organization of revolutionary socialists. And then it goes on. What I'd like to know from you is how you went from being socialist revolutionaries to neo-Nazis camouflaged as Democrats.
I think you should stop insulting the intelligence of the American voter, and especially the voters of Illinois. We've just had a very important election in that state. I think it's a kind of referendum on the Graham-Rudman law. It's a referendum on AIDS. It's a referendum on the situation vis-a-vis the Soviets. It comes at a time of tremendous crisis, and I would hope that you would not banalize the debate this evening by getting into these gratuitous...
I'm asking you a question. You were socialist revolutionaries.
...is a shot that's been heard around the world.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. Now, who was that lady? She is a LaRouche. You may have met them. They sit at airports, neatly dressed and recently bathed. They buttonhole you. They tell you that the Queen of England is behind the drug traffic, that Henry Kissinger is a homosexual, not only a Jew, but a faggot, is the way they put it. Worse, they want to talk to you about it. And the best way to deal with them